Hey guys, welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Thank you so much for hitting play today. We are going to cover another cool study that came across my desk. And this is the same way I opened our last episode, I feel, but there's been a lot of really interesting research that this is such a great place to share that with you guys. And so today we're talking about insulin resistance, specifically connected to recurrent pregnancy loss. So I want to start this episode off by just giving a trigger warning that we are going to be talking about miscarriage and recurrent pregnancy loss. So if you are not in a mental space right now to welcome that conversation with open arms, hit pause, come back to it at another time. Because we're going to talk a little bit about miscarriage. We're going to talk about it specifically with insulin resistance. I have had a request from a wonderful, beautiful patient of mine to put out some more content on miscarriages. So that is something that will come down the pipeline, and we'll make sure we always give you a trigger warning beforehand. But I know that it's something that's not really openly talked about. So this specifically with recurrent pregnancy loss, and I'll define that in a second for you guys. When I saw this study, I was really, really excited because if you've listened to the podcast since its conception, you'll know how incredibly passionate I am about insulin and insulin resistance, specifically in relation to fertility. It is like the long lost hormone when it comes to fertility. It's still not often properly assessed and checked for in the fertility realm. And in our practice and in fertility confidence method, we are finding insulin resistance, even mild to moderate insulin resistance in, probably 40 to 50% of our population that you wouldn't even expect it in. So screening for insulin resistance is incredibly important in the fertility world, regardless if you have had a miscarriage in the past or not. But now we're even seeing some really interesting data on recurrent loss and IR. So what exactly is recurrent pregnancy loss? We define that as 3 consecutive miscarriages. So my philosophy is we don't need to wait to do deeper dive testing or investigation, whether you've had 1 miscarriage or you had 3. I don't really care. We're gonna dive a little bit deeper, but the actual scientific, the medical definition of RPL, recurrent pregnancy loss, is 3 consecutive miscarriages. So when we're looking at this study, we're looking at couples who have had 3 or more losses. It's actually a meta-analysis. So it's a combination of, I think, 20 different studies. So there's there's a wide range of kind of a population, but every one that they looked at all had recurrent pregnancy loss. So 3 or more miscarriages. Now, in terms of insulin resistance, I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining what that actually is because you can go back and listen to that. So on episode 16 and 17, I go into a much deeper conversation about what exactly is insulin resistance, how do we test it, and even how do we do some treatment principles for that. So if you want to go back after this and listen to 16 and 17 and learn more about insulin resistance specifically, you can do that very, very easily. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on actually what that is. We're going to talk about the study specifically, the connection with IR and RPL, and just some really interesting pieces as to why I think this is important. So first and foremost, this is a new study, 2022, published in BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth, and it is what we call a meta-analysis. So it actually looks at multiple different randomized controlled trials and puts it together and analyzes the data. And so the really cool thing is because they do that, we actually have a larger population base. So there's over 4,000 women that they're looking at in this study instead of, sometimes with infertility and fertility research, we're like, oh, this is a really cool study done in 100 people. One of the really kind of crappy things right now with the red light therapy research that's really cool is the studies are so small. We're seeing, the studies are really promising, but we're like, okay, 10 women. That's not a really great population size. So it's always good when we can get these big meta-analyses in fertility because we're knowing that we're looking at a much larger population base usually. So this is a good place to kind of get some data. So recurrent loss, we're seeing that in about 2 to 5% of the population. And there's some different reasons that might be happening, okay? Genetics is a big one. So chromosomal abnormalities, uterine abnormalities, hormonal disruption, autoimmune, clotting disorders, and then like other that they say. But the reality is that about 50 to 60% of recurrent pregnancy loss is unexplained. And I know that we all really despise that word in the fertility community, right? That unexplained, that there is no answer. And this is why this study is so valuable, because if we're talking about 50 to 60% of recurrent pregnancy loss couples having an unexplained reason as to why they're continuing to have miscarriage, and we're now seeing from this research that insulin resistance is highly linked to recurrent pregnancy loss, yet it's not something being regularly screened, how many of those unexplained cases can we actually explain if we're doing the proper screening? That's something that I just think is incredibly, incredibly valuable and so cool when we're looking at the new research. So what did this study find? So simplistically saying, they found a connection between women having insulin resistance and having a higher likely rate of recurrent pregnancy loss. So not even a higher likely rate of just flat out like one miscarriage, multiple miscarriages. So we know there's a strong connection between insulin resistance and miscarriage. Why? This is why we care, okay? And then we'll talk about how do we actually diagnose and properly screen for this, because this is something that still to this day boils my blood. With fertility clinics, is we're still not properly screening for insulin resistance. So there's a few big reasons why we care about this when it comes to miscarriage. One, we know that insulin resistance influences something called homocysteine. We know that elevated homocysteine levels in the body increase your risk of recurrent pregnancy loss and miscarriage. And the reason for that is homocysteine impacts inflammation in the body. We all know, especially if you've been around for a while, that we feel over here at FCM very strongly about inflammation being a big cause of unexplained infertility and miscarriage. And it can also impact the circulation by impacting the blood vessels and things like that. So homocysteine is something that we can actually screen for in your blood and see. And if it's elevated, we need to work on bringing that down and looking at why that's happening and putting some other pieces in place to help treat that. But there's a connection between homocysteine and insulin resistance. So if you're someone who has had homocysteine screened before and it's elevated, we then also should be screening you for insulin resistance as well, because that might be one of the reasons why homocysteine is slightly higher. So that's number one, influencing homocysteine. We're also then seeing inflammation and circulatory issues from that. The second is that we see placenta dysfunction with insulin resistance. And this is something that we talk about in episodes 16 and 17 when we go into insulin resistance a little bit more, is that we're seeing the elevated levels of glucose and insulin in the bloodstream actually impact the placenta development when you are pregnant. So that is one of the main drivers, I believe, in terms of miscarriage. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't care, but the actual health of the placenta is impacted. So the growth of the placenta between, ground zero and week 8 to 10 is crucial. And if it's being deprived of oxygen, from like improper blood flow, if it's being drowned in insulin and glucose, it's not able to grow, mature, develop the way that it should. And then around 8, 10, 11, 12 weeks, we'll have a loss because the fetus is no longer being supplied with the nutrients that it needs from the placenta when it's supposed to be taking over. So placenta development is a huge reason we cite for in terms of screening for insulin resistance. And now we're seeing in this study that they're claiming the same thing, that they're actually seeing improperly developed placenta and mid to late first trimester losses being in connection with elevated insulin and glucose in the blood. The third one then is blood vessel development. So in early pregnancy, our blood volume doubles. We need to actually create an organ, aka the placenta. Like, women everywhere are badasses, okay? We literally grow organs and humans, and we like shed parts of our organs every month and continue to just get up and go to work and pretend like nothing's wrong. Topic for another time, but you are all badass superheroes, okay? So we need to grow an organ. How do we grow an organ? Well, we need to supply that part of the body with an epic amount of blood flow, because through our blood flow and through our circulation, we're bringing oxygen, we're bringing nutrients, we're bringing the building blocks that the body needs to actually do that superhero work. And we now see in the literature that insulin resistance actually impacts the body's ability to create blood vessels. So we're not potentially, this again then connects to that placenta development. Well, if the insulin is high and we're struggling to make blood vessels and the endothelial cells are being impacted, then we're potentially not getting enough blood flow connection to the placenta, therefore not enough oxygen going to the placenta, therefore placenta dysfunction, right? Those two are very intricately connected. Circulation is such a huge important piece of fertility and miscarriage prevention. And elevated insulin and glucose levels are directly impacting your body's ability to circulate its blood, oxygen, and nutrients appropriately. Let's just take our infertility hats off for a hot second and think about how that's impacting your body in other ways. Your muscles need oxygen and nutrients. Your cells in your organs need oxygen and nutrients to create energy, to do the things. It's so incredibly important that we have good blood flow and circulation, regardless if you're trying to conceive or not, right? So this is just coming back to a lot of things we don't talk about, but that we know, at least as practitioners in the background, is we're helping you make babies inside Fertility Confidence Method, but we're also improving your health long term. We don't really shine that in front of you in the moment because you don't really care, right? You just want a baby. But the reality is you're, by doing these things, by taking charge of your fertility, by taking care of your body, by prepping your body for pregnancy, you are actually improving the longevity of your life. And that is really, really cool. And we know that your metabolic health is so incredibly important to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and all the slew of complications that come with that as well. Bringing this back to fertility and pregnancy, improving things like this is also going to reduce your risk of gestational diabetes and preterm labor and preeclampsia, excessive weight gain and things in your pregnancy, which is then going to healthier pregnancy, hopefully healthier baby, healthier birth and delivery and postpartum. Lifelong health is so incredibly important, and metabolic health is so, so incredibly important. And this is just such a big missing link in the fertility world, unfortunately. So homocysteine, placenta dysfunction, overall circulation issues, inflammatory issues. That's one big thing of why we're seeing more miscarriages with insulin resistance. Also, if we're linking this back to IVF specifically, another piece that they're seeing with IVF and insulin resistance is that there is a lower percentage of mature eggs. A lower percentage of mature eggs, and they're seeing poor embryo quality in IVF in women who have insulin resistance. So the insulin and glucose is actually impacting the folliculogenesis of the eggs, that maturation process of the eggs. So if you're someone, let's say you're not doing IVF, so we don't have a lot of empirical data of what's going on in your body. Let's say you have delayed ovulation, or you're not ovulating at all, or you have low progesterone, and a short luteal phase. These are all things that would make me think, how's your egg quality? What's the health of your corpus luteum like? Is your FSH high? Then we maybe want to have a conversation about these things. These are all pieces of the puzzle that are linking back to that egg quality. And we can give you lots of CoQ10 and hope for the best. But the reality is, if your egg quality is being negatively impacted by your metabolic health, AKA insulin resistance, high levels of glucose, high lipids, no amount of CoQ10 is going to fix that unless we do the nutrition, the lifestyle, and then the strategic supplementation to actually influence the root cause, which is the metabolic health. right? I hope that makes sense. Tangent time, but that's okay. So we're seeing poor embryo quality in IVF. We're also seeing that lower number of matured eggs, lower numbers of actual embryo development and formation in IVF. And the other piece of the puzzle, and the last thing I'll mention here, because it's a mouse study, not a human study, but in mouse studies where there's elevated insulin, they're actually seeing poorer rates of implantation. So when we're thinking about what needs to happen for implantation, again, we can look at the impact of circulation, blood and oxygen to the uterus to thicken that lining, to prep it for implantation is going to be a big piece of the puzzle. So though we're not seeing that directly in human studies yet, I think we will once they actually start digging a little bit deeper into that. And hopefully, this study looking at recurrent pregnancy loss is actually, the first sort of like deeper dive look into how else is this impacting. So really quickly before we sign off, how do we actually screen for this properly? What I'm seeing coming out of a lot of clinics and OBGYN offices is still looking strictly at a hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is your marker of blood sugar control over 3 months. It's a great way to see what's the average of your blood sugar over 3 months. We want that to be around 5. Anything over 5.3, I'm kind of going, okay, we're dealing with some moments in time over the last 3 months where your blood sugar is elevated. Anything lower than like a 4.9, 4.8 is great, okay? If we're getting into the 5.5 range, we're now in the at-risk category for diabetes. And then I think it's 6 where it's considered pre-diabetic, or it's 5.8 or something. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. But there's a whole range before you're then diagnosed diabetic. It's still how they're screening for diabetes, which, because this is not a diabetes podcast, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about how I also think that is not the right way to screen for diabetes. But the short version of that story is you should be screening for insulin resistance, not your hemoglobin A1C. Conversation for another time. Unfortunately, this is still how we're screening for metabolic health in the fertility world. The issue with that is you can have excellent blood sugar control for many, many years and still be insulin resistant. The beautiful thing about your body is that it adapts. So the insulin resistance is basically forcing your body to use more insulin to be able to manage your blood sugar. So there's more blood sugar, it needs more insulin to do its job. Then there's more blood sugar, so it needs a little bit more insulin to do its job, but the blood sugar still looks good on paper. What doesn't look good on paper is your insulin, but the issue is we're not looking at that number. We're waiting until it's really freaking bad. So eventually there comes a time where your body's like, can't do it anymore. Like quite literally done. You're not treating me well. I'm over it. Figure it out on your own. You are now diabetic. Is essentially what happens. Your insulin just loses its ability to manage your blood sugar. And then we start to see your blood sugar creep up. And the reality is we're not being diagnosed with a metabolic issue until you're diabetic. But we can actually catch that years and years and years in advance if we're screening properly. And in the fertility world, we need to be screening that more in an early screen way, because if you're already in the pre-diabetes category, your insulin's been high for a long time. And that's possibly something that's been missed. So what do you want to see in your blood work? You want to run 2 things. You want to run your fasted glucose and your fasted insulin. So when I say fasted, I mean you are fasted. So you're doing that over like an overnight fast. So you eat your dinner, normal, go to bed, wake up, do your blood work before you have breakfast. So at least 12 hours we're fasted. If you have something to eat before you do this testing, you're not going to get an accurate look at your HOMA-IR, which is the calculation that we do with those 2 labs to get a numerical marker of your degree of insulin resistance. So you can find those calculators really easily online. That's all I use as well. And you put those 2 numbers in, it pops you out something called a HOMA-IR. We ideally want this to be below 2. If you are above 2, we call that moderate insulin resistance. Anything above a 3, I think, is severe insulin resistance. And now we know we are diagnosed with insulin resistance, regardless if your blood sugar control is good or not, regardless if your hemoglobin A1C looks good or not, your insulin is not doing well. And we know from the research that a fasted insulin, fasted glucose, and a HOMA-IR are the markers that we're looking for. It doesn't matter what your hemoglobin A1C says. So we need to start screening for this properly. And if you're someone who fits the bill for insulin resistance, meaning you're having trouble losing weight, you have a lot of sugar cravings, you have long irregular cycles or elevated testosterone, or recurrent pregnancy loss, we need to be properly screening for this. So if you're curious for more, I want you to go back to episode 16 and 17. I'm also going to pop the link for this study in the show notes for you. So if you want to peek through it, add a little bit more detail, you can absolutely do that. Hopefully you wrote down that proper testing. If not, you can scroll back and listen again, and take that to your doctor and ask them to please screen your metabolic health for you. If you're in the States, you can take that information and roll with it to a lab. If you're in Ontario, naturopathic doctors like myself can actually order blood work for you if your doctor's not willing to do that. So you're more than welcome to come inside FCM, work with us directly, and we can help make sure that you're being not only screened properly, but treated properly as well. So if that's of interest to you, whether you're in Ontario or not, but you're ready for some support that is specific and tailored for you and your needs to help you advocate for your fertility success, and to help you get down to the root cause of why this isn't working for you. That is exactly what we excel in inside Fertility Confidence Method. I'd love to have a conversation with you to see if you are a good fit. No obligation whatsoever. We'll help you figure out some of the roadblocks on your fertility journey right now, and how, what you need to do moving forward to overcome those. If working with us is a good fit, we'll walk you through what that looks like. And if not, we'll help you find a resource, okay? No stress. All you need to do is just have a quiet place to talk about your fertility experience. Let us help you move forward on your fertility journey, and hopefully dig a little bit deeper with you and help you make a baby. So you can schedule a call at kelseyduncan.com/clarity-call-application. And as always, if you have any questions at all, come find me over on Instagram at Fertility Confidence Method. Shoot me a DM, and I'll see you guys in the next one.